All right, I'd like to bring in my special guest for this segment, forensic criminologist, death investigator, and a crime scene reconstructionist, Dr. Laura Pettler. Doctor, it's great to have you on the show again. Truly appreciate you taking out the time to joining me. You know what's interesting? I'm trying to get to the bottom of the structure of this relationship, especially after listening to the doctor's testimony. Some of the language that she used, they engaged in mutual abuse. She talked about Amber speaking rapidly and he couldn't keep up. She seemed to suggest, or at least it came off to me, like Amber was more of the instigator in this relationship. I want to first get your impressions of her testimony and how she characterized their relationship.
You know, Michael, I think that her testimony was critical to both sides, both the Depp side and the Heard side, from the standpoint that what she was explaining was that from her standpoint as a counselor, as their counselor, even though both of them allegedly had come from abusive backgrounds, Johnny Depp had been controlled for decades, like 30 years, she said. And the other thing that struck me specifically about the counselor's testimony was what she said about Amber's nightmare. She stated that abandonment is Amber's worst nightmare, or was her worst nightmare. And so in my experience as an expert in domestic violence and in domestic violence homicide, those kind of factors can play key roles when you have two people that have come from abusive backgrounds that may be triggered, as she explained, by each other, and then something goes wrong in that relationship and it becomes mutually toxic. Nobody knows what happened between them, because domestic violence is, as we know, closed door murder. It's behind closed doors murder, or I'm sorry, violence, not murder. I apologize. And so it's in this case that we have to focus on the fact that there is evidence, but it may not come in the form of physical evidence, because that's just not the way these cases are often prosecuted in the criminal sense. But in the civil sense, it does come down to he said, she said in the end, if there's no physical evidence.
Now, you say you have a lot of experience, and we know you have a lot of experience with domestic violence cases. This is a case that, at least in my lean experience, doesn't follow your typical sort of channels, right? When you talk about control, right? Domestic violence oftentimes about control. In this case, it looks like, based on what this counselor said, it would be Amber who was interested in control because she didn't want Johnny to leave. And of course, Johnny's claiming what really triggered everything was when he wanted to leave her. He's the one that wanted to leave the relationship. Generally, it's the other way around. Does that signal anything to you about the dynamics of this relationship?
Yes, that it was extremely fluid and that it ebbed and flowed back and forth, kind of like a tennis match. And that in those situations where you have one person that's leaving, it's important, Michael, for us all to remember that the core and the essence of domestic violence is power and control. It is always about power and control. Sometimes it can be additionally about anger, and sometimes it doesn't have to be about anger. But if there is a person in a relationship that has a fear of abandonment, it can definitely trigger a lot of emotions and a lot of emotional responses, specifically based in anger toward each other, which becomes then mutually toxic.
All right, now you talk about the anger, mutually toxic. I want to take a listen now to a phone call between Heard and Depp. This might give us some insight into what we've been talking about. Let's take a listen.
I'm not going to be in a physical altercation with you.
Then don't.
You hit me last night, you
What about all the other times you split? Hey, come on, you cannot act like that. It's about that. It's not.
Well, on a plane, I can't split.
No, and you hit back, so don't act like you don't participate.
I pushed you.
I'm not going to get into the details of that fight. You and I both know that you split when there is no physical violence involved. And that you do it at the very beginning of fights these days. And if you split and you go into a different room and you don't actually leave that house, it does nothing but perpetuate the fight. And you don't actually do it respectfully. You don't do it in a way that actually means we won't fight. It always makes more fights. It always makes them longer. It never, ever makes you calmer. You never come out going, I want to talk, or I'm okay, or it's going to be okay. And I am 100 I'm sick and tired 100% of being the only one that goes and fights for it. You know what that does? It demoralizes the half of this relationship that is me. It demeans me, demoralizes me.
Really?
Yes, really. Really, when you split on me, how do you feel when I leave you?
When I split, when I go into the
before.
other room, you're saying?
You leave you get another room, you get a flight, things like that. And you asked me not to in Australia, and ever since
No,
then,
how many?
I don't know, I have to count them up.
No, because I haven't left you in a house maybe twice. Last night and another time.
No, you've done it before. I've come here before. I'm not doing that anymore.
Well, yeah, you've come here before. Last time and another time, and then last night.
You've done this several times, and getting me a room. I mean, getting another room in a hotel is just the same thing.
All right, doctor, I have to ask you, because whenever I listen to that, you know, I think many of us have been in relationships at one time or another with parts of that type of thing going on, but you can really see, for me, clearly, just how toxic this relationship is. What is your takeaway from that combo?
Yes, definitely. And, you know, certainly I don't want to make any accusations against either party. You know, that's not what we're here to discuss. And domestic violence is a very real and very serious problem for our country. And so it's hard to extrapolate exactly what happened here. But what I do hear Amber saying is that she is very concerned about the time that he moves away from her. So it appears that from this conversation, she's wanting him to stay and engage in the conversation, regardless if it's a fight, because she feels like she's the only person fighting for their relationship. He feels like he's needing to back off, needing to go calm down, and she's saying that doesn't work. You don't calm down. You never calm down. Every time you go away, you come back and you're still the same. You know, splitting off from me does not solve the problem. I'm the only one fighting, and it makes me feel uncomfortable or sad. I think she said demoralizing, that she feels that way because she doesn't feel like he's fighting for the same thing. Maybe she feels like she's not as important to him as he is to her, and he is okay with being away from her.
Yeah, those and trust me, those are time-honored issues in male-female relationships, as I'm sure many people understand what I'm saying. But let me ask you this, as someone who's dealt with very serious domestic violence cases and different issues in that realm, do you have any problem at all knowing what her role was in this relationship? The fact that there were certainly instances where she was abusive, physically abusive, mentally and physically abusive to Johnny Depp. Her getting on the soapbox the way she did. Because I think what Johnny Depp's side is trying to do is let people know that here's someone who got on a soapbox talking about, you know, domestic violence when she engaged in this herself.
Yes, and Michael, I unfortunately see it from the homicide standpoint because I work domestic violence homicides more often than anything else, and hundreds of them in the past 20-some years. And so what I do see in these kinds of relationships, typically when they end, is somebody accusing somebody. Either they both accuse each other, or one person accuses the other, but there's always accusation. Sometimes you hear people say, oh, you know, he's a psychopath, she's a psychopath, he's crazy, she's crazy, she's, you know, a narcissist, he's a narcissist. All these words fly back and forth. They don't really know what they mean. But one thing that is very important to remember is that no one, not Ms. Heard, not Mr. Depp, no one should be in a position of violence. And if they were involved in a toxic relationship, whether it was one-sided or whether it was mutual, the best course of action is to separate, even though that is the most dangerous time for a domestic violence victim in the course of the cycle of violence, is when he or she is leaving. And I'm glad that both of them are no longer in the situation where they might feel the way that they have stated that they felt.
Amen, Dr. Laura Pettler. I've always said the silver lining in this case, which has many, many ugly elements, is that we're in civil court and not in a criminal court. Right? At the end of the day, That's the
Yes.
silver lining here, right?
Absolutely, Michael.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yes.
All right, Dr. Laura Pettler, I want to thank you so much for joining me tonight. Truly appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
I got chills a couple of times because this is really serious stuff, and I'm glad you were able to give us some perspective on it. You have a great
Thank you for
weekend.
having
I'll
me.
let you go now. All right, coming up next, we have an update on another trial we're following here at Court TV, the romance novelist murder trial. Court TV legal correspondent Julia Janae brings us the latest on the other side of the break. We're right here on Court TV.